So now at last, let's talk about what agreement is. So our objectives in this topic are pretty simple. We're going to identify what the nature of an agreement is, we're going to examine the rules, and we're going to understand the process by which agreements are formed. So straight from your text, actually this is from the course notes I think, agreement is an essential element in the formation of a legally binding contract. A valid agreement requires the making of an offer by one party and another party to accept it. Pretty straightforward, right? We need offer, we need acceptance, and then we get agreement. So essentially, I've already introduced that. We're going to explore these things. Under the classical contract theory, which we keep coming back to, acceptance or agreement is essentially the moment of conception. That magic moment where the parties come together and they have created this enforceable private law between them that sets out what their respective obligations are and their respective rights are. So even though we start with that moment of agreement, really everything sort of falls into that single moment. And sometimes, for reasons that we'll explore, it's really important to know the moment of conception. Just like we need to know when our birthdays are, we need to know when a contract is formed, and we need to understand where it's formed. So at the moment that a contract is made, all of the parties' contractual obligations spring into existence in a bilateral contract anyway. We've talked a little bit already about the nature of an agreement, and it's really important, particularly before we drill down into this offer and acceptance, to remember that the element is agreement. The elements, and when I went to law school, we learned that the elements included offer and acceptance. But really, I think it makes a lot more sense for the element to be agreement, because we can't always identify offer and acceptance. So the Latin phrase, I think I've already told you how much I hate Latin, but this one is consensus ad idem. So they agree amongst themselves. So it's a meeting of the minds, a moment in time when the parties have reached agreement, or objectively thinking, a person of sound mind and reasonable intellect would determine, based on the information available, that the parties had in fact reached an agreement. So we'll talk quite a lot, and you'll doubtless come up with this kind of stuff in a lot of your other subjects, about this idea of a reasonableness test. So it doesn't matter what you intended, what matters is what it looked like you intended to the world, or to a reasonable person having the same knowledge as the person that you made the communication to. So in determining whether an agreement has been reached, that objective test, which comes from Carlhill and also in Taylor and Johnson, which we'll talk about, is always the test that we apply. So, in a nutshell, one slide to rule them all. If we have offer and we add acceptance to it, we get agreement. Easy peasy, we can all go home now. That offer needs to be clear and capable of acceptance on its terms, so that's very much linked to certainty. That acceptance needs to be communicated to the offeror without variation or change. But at the end of the day, I know we're going to spend quite a lot of time doing it. Are you looking, sorry, I can see somebody looking on the printed slides. This may surprise you, but I prepare for my classes. And sometimes I do a run through before I turn up on the day, and I have a bit of a tendency to think, no, I think there's a better way of explaining that, and I'll throw something in. And this slide I just made just now, so it's new. Usually I'll just move them around a bit. I'll give you my slides as I finish. In my ideal world, you wouldn't have slides to start off with, that I think of them as for me, to keep me on track. But I get it, how useful they are to you, and I'm very pleased they're useful to you, but sometimes I change them. And believe it or not, it is because I care. So this is our one slide on agreement. Which reminds me, before I go on to the next thing, I sent out a note. I'm really confused with online as to which of my announcements you get and you don't get. But somebody asked me quite an excellent question over when we do topics over 2 weeks, which bits should they read and which bits shouldn't they read? And of course, because I'm a girly swat, I say read everything. But you want to read it in a practical and measured way, and there is a document that is a little bit hard to find. I hope I've pointed it out to you well. I will probably update it a few times over the course of the semester because when new cases come out, I just keep updating it. But it's kind of my overview case guide. In fact, you guys must look really nice or something. You must be nice to me because I don't think I've ever pointed it out to students before about week 12 before. I never think to, but it was just a question that made it obvious to point it out. But yeah, it will change. I would not rely on it as your only thing to take into the exam with you, but a lot of people find it quite useful to add their own notes to and stuff, and I'm more than happy for you to do that. One of the things I think is relatively helpful with it, a lot of the cases are actually linked, so you can go and see them online too if that's useful to you. So enjoy that. If you have troubles finding it, ask me.